Prologue. Shell casings and bullets littered the rocky dirt, but Katie Thornton wasn't finished with her target practice. She laid on her stomach, her eye pressed against the scope as she aligned the crosshairs over her target 100 yards downrange. The metal circle hanging from a tree branch between a pair of rocks was only 3 inches in diameter. It was what she called the perfect bullseye. She hadn't been able to consistently hit it since she hung the small medallion 3 months ago. Her goal was to hit 3 in a row. She had just hit 2. Dozens of other targets rested between Katie and her penultimate challenge. Every piece of metal was dented from thousands of rounds that she had emptied over the past few years. Living off-grid didn't provide much recreational time, but the few free moments she did have were spent here. The wind had kicked up, and the metal circle swung precariously from side to side. She had always struggled to hit moving targets. Katie relaxed the tension in her body and controlled her breathing as she placed her finger on the trigger. She closed her left eye. Her right eye focused on the metal pendulum passing over the crosshairs of her scope, waiting. Finally, she squeezed the trigger. The long rifle recoiled sharply against her arm. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the mountain air, and she smiled when she heard the familiar metal ping of the bullet striking the target. Katie removed her eye from the scope and rested her chin on the stock of the rifle, admiring her skilled shot. She had woken up before dawn to finish her chores so she could come out here to relax and practice. She was glad she did. Today was going to be hard. Katie knew that the moment she received the call from her brother last week. She hadn't called him back, even though he had called her over a dozen times since then. She was sure he would call today as well. She had come out here for a distraction. But now, with her bullets dispensed and no more ammunition for practice, the distraction was over, and her mind wandered to the funeral happening in Charlotte. Katie quickly pushed the thought from her head and stood. She dusted the dirt and bits of rocks from her stomach and legs. Her attire was the same as every day. Long cargo pants, a long-sleeve performance shirt, sunglasses, and ball cap. The clothes were old but clean. What her wardrobe lacked in variety, it compensated for with its functionality. And she didn't have anyone to impress out here. She lived alone. She enjoyed being alone. Katie picked up her gear and departed her homemade range on the mountainside and walked back through the forest to her cabin. The area had good hunting grounds, fresh water, and was far away from any large metropolitan area. The nearest town was 3 miles away, and it held a population of fewer than 100 people. She had bought her patch of paradise with cash, but the view from the mountaintop was priceless. Katie was 100 miles east of Charlotte, where her family lived. 100 miles away from the choking congestion that plagued the city daily. 100 miles away from the crime-infested streets. Away from the people who would rather look at their phones than talk to one another. 100 miles away from people who had forgotten what life was really about. Living. Of course, isolation had its downsides. Katie hadn't seen her family in years, and her absence had put a strain on their relationship. It had been hard to leave them, but at the time, she didn't see any other way. A lot had changed since then, and she had grown so used to being alone, she no longer remembered what it was like to need someone. She was self-sufficient now, prepared to face anything. She was a survivor. After years of solitude, Katie noticed the cracks in society. She saw the vulnerability in law and order and how easy it could collapse. She believed a catastrophic event, either man-made or brought on by the wrath of nature, would trigger nationwide panic. It was the kind of event that would claim the lives of millions. But Katie refused to be a victim. She had spent the past 5 years preparing, honing her skills, bracing for the inevitable. When the time came, she would be ready. However, the thought of society's collapse turned Katie's thoughts back to her family, and she stopped walking. She lifted her gaze to the sky and studied the position of the sun. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the morning now. In a few hours, her family would be gathered around her father's casket in the old Baptist church where they had gone to services on Sunday when she was a child. And even though her father was dead, Katie couldn't manage to find an ounce of grief. Mike, Katie's brother, wanted her to attend the funeral, and for his sake she almost did. But every time she considered going, Katie remembered the last conversation she had with her father, and her anger overrode her sympathy, just like now. It was a 20-minute walk from her range to the cabin, and Katie was glad to see her small home nestled in the shade of the mountainside, surrounded by trees. A few hides hung from lines on the porch. She had hunted deer last week, and the skin she peeled from the buck would provide good leather for clothes and packs. When she hunted, she wasted nothing of the animal. Every part was used. Survival was more than just knowing how to take care of yourself. It was maximizing the efficiency of resources. And Katie had grown very efficient. Katie entered the cabin and removed her gear, setting her weapon and her pack by the door. The inside of the cabin was bare bones. The kitchen consisted of a potbelly stove, a fireplace, and a dry freezer, along with cabinets where she stored the food that she used daily. There was a living room, with a small table where she ate her meals, which provided a scenic view of the surrounding mountains. Past the living room was the hallway, which led to the bedrooms. She had 2 rooms, but since she never received visitors, the spare bedroom was used as storage space. Katie entered her own bedroom, which mimicked the minimalistic style of the rest of the cabin. She had her bed, a dresser, and a chest at the foot of her bed which held all of her personal items. She also had a mirror on the wall, but she tended to avoid it if she could. Katie walked to the chest at the foot of her bed and entered the combination for the lock. She waited for the click when the correct sequence of numbers had been entered, then opened the lid. Inside were mementos from her past. Some were from her childhood, others from her time in the military. But what she wanted was beneath those personal items. The satellite phone Katie removed from the trunk was her one link to the outside world, aside from the CB radio she used to check the weather reports. The weather could change on a dime up in the mountains, and it was important to know what was coming so she could properly prepare. Katie gripped the phone in her hand and then sat on the edge of the bed. She knew Mike would be hurting today, and if she couldn't be there physically, she thought a quick call might help. But when Katie pressed the power button on the phone, nothing happened. She frowned, pressing it again. Nothing. She couldn't remember the last time she charged it, so she retrieved the cable and then walked over to her solar power battery charger. She plugged in the device and then pressed the power button again. Still nothing. Katie stared at the satellite phone for a moment longer, wondering if she had done something wrong. But then a thought caused the hair on the back of her neck to stiffen. She quickly set the phone down and hurried to her CB radio in the living room. Katie flicked the power dial once, then twice, but received no response. 2 of her most reliable electronic devices were no longer working. It wasn't likely that both of them would quit working at the same time, unless... Katie rushed back into her room and grabbed a fresh go bag, along with her concealed 9mm Ruger, which was her favorite handgun. She hurried toward the door, picking up a rifle along the way. She reloaded the weapon with a fresh magazine, packing a few extras, and then hurried out the door. Armed and with her go-bag, Katie hurried to the old 1975 Jeep Wrangler and tossed her gear into the back seat. She'd purchased the vehicle from an auction and fixed it up herself. She stripped it down to the bare necessities. It didn't even have AC, but it could get her anywhere she needed to go, on nearly any terrain. The old Jeep started up like Katie thought it would, and she backed out of the cabin and followed the single dirt path off of her property. It was slow going until she reached the first paved road, and then she was able to pick up speed as she headed toward the town. Katie had both hands on the wheel, the sun beating down from above and not a cloud in the sky. She never understood why the weather was so nice on a bad day. The paved road reached the bending curve at the base of the mountain, and it wouldn't be long before she spied the little town that she would have to pass through before she could turn onto the highway. But as she drew closer, she saw a truck had broken down and she slowed, recognizing the vehicle. It belonged to Waylon Hart, a local farmer who sold his produce in town. He had some of the best apples she'd ever tasted. Katie parked the Jeep at a distance and retrieved her rifle. She approached slowly, her senses heightened by the situation. Both truck doors were left open, and the front of the engine was steaming. Busted radiator. If the car had broken down, it wouldn't have made sense for Waylon to leave the doors open. Sure, they were in a small town, but when Katie saw the keys still dangling from the ignition, she knew that something was wrong. Both hands still on her rifle, Katie stepped back from the truck and noticed the bullet holes on the back right tire well and a smear of blood by the doorframe. Gunfire, distant but clear, echoed down the road. Katie instinctively raised her rifle despite the threat's proximity. Not wanting anyone to hear her coming in her Jeep, Katie proceeded on foot, hugging the mountainside and keeping her guard up for any more surprises that she might uncover along the way. But when Katie finally cleared the side of the mountain and saw the town up ahead, she froze for a second, thinking that her mind was playing tricks on her. A blockade had been erected on both sides of the town. There was no way of going through it unless you had a tank or some kind of armored vehicle, because the machine gun nest that was perched with a man guarding it was meant to mow down anyone that got close. Katie was too far away from the rest of the town to see anything else, and she approached from the road. Then Mr. Machine Gun would have a clear line of sight on her. Masked men corralled the townspeople by gunpoint, herding them into the library in the center of town. And while Katie had no idea who might have taken over the town, she now understood what was happening. No electronics, broken down vehicles on the road. The country had been attacked by an EMP. Chapter 1. Mike Thornton was dressed in his black suit and tie with a white shirt, and the reflection he caught in the bathroom mirror reminded him of the waiter at the steakhouse Lisa took him to on their 15th wedding anniversary last month. His parents watched the kids, and they spent the night in the city, eating, drinking, and catching up on some much-needed romance. It was a good night. Mike stared down at the phone on the bathroom counter. He had been battling calling his sister one last time. She hadn't answered him all week. He didn't know why he thought today would be different. Mike sighed and shifted his weight from his right foot to his left and crossed his arms. He knew he shouldn't have gotten his hopes up. He was asking too much of her to come down for the funeral. He knew she and Dad had their differences, but he never understood what started their feud. And now Mike was dressed in the only black suit he owned, which Lisa had thankfully cleaned for him, wearing a tie that was choking him to death and waiting for the rest of the family to get ready. Even now, He heard the echoes of his family through the walls, and their muffled voices made him smile. He couldn't imagine Kelly, his oldest and only daughter, hating him the way that Katie hated their dad. His heart ached at just the thought of it. And while their relationship wasn't at its best right now, because Kelly was in the tumultuous throes of puberty, he knew they didn't hate each other. The only time they really argued was when Kelly dressed for school like she was going to the beach. The phone buzzed, and Mike's heart jumped, hoping that it was his sister. It wasn't. "Hey, Kev," Mike said, trying not to sound disappointed. "Hey, Mikey." Kevin McDonald was Mike's partner at the Charlotte PD. The pair had been together ever since both of them passed the detective's exam 8 years prior. They had become close over the years, and both men thought of each other as brothers more than colleagues. "How you holding up?" Mike shifted the weight on his feet again and cleared his throat. "I'm all right. How are things going with the transfer?" "We're putting him in the van now," Kevin answered. "Good," Mike said. "Any problems?" "No," Kevin answered. "And don't worry about this. You have enough on your plate." 3 months ago, Mike and Kevin were part of a massive statewide investigation involving the FBI to capture a serial killer who had tormented their state for 8 months. Mike and Kevin worked the case day and night until they caught their man. Melvin Harris was a 32-year-old Caucasian male who had murdered 28 people, terrorizing the Charlotte area and surrounding small-town Appalachia. In the 17 years that Mike had been a police officer, Melvin Harris was the most violent, perverse, and intelligent criminal that he had ever apprehended. "We'll get this man boarded on his flight, and then I'm off to pick up my cycle from the shop," Kevin said. "It's a beautiful day for a ride." Kevin was a ride-or-die Harley aficionado. At the start of every shift, he always drove by McClellan's motorcycle shop, so Kevin could look at the vintage, fully restored 1960 Panhead. He'd even gotten Mike to ride with him a few times. It was fun. "Listen, I'll have my phone off for the procession, but don't be afraid to keep sending me text updates," Mike said. "It'll be nice to have some good news once today is over." "You got it, buddy," Kevin said, "and give my best to the family." "I will," Mike said. "Thanks, partner." The call ended, and Mike kept both arms straight at his side. He really would have rather been helping his partner transfer Harris over to the federal holding facility, where he would be awaiting trial. Even though Mike and Charlotte PD were technically the ones who had arrested him, because of the violent nature of his crimes and the fact that he killed people in 3 different states, they had to turn the creature over to the feds. But Mike didn't mind. The less time with that monster, the better. It was Melvin's eyes that were so unsettling. The way that they studied you like a person would study an animal at the zoo. He didn't believe people were his equals. He only thought of them as games to be played, instruments of his pleasure, to satisfy his darkest desires. The man was a psychopath, and it was only a matter of time before he was executed by lethal injection. Mike rubbed his eyes and saw a cup of coffee in his future. He needed to be awake for the drive into the city to pick up his mother. He pocketed his phone and then exited the bedroom, listening to Lisa help their son, Casey, with his outfit. Some coffee was still left in the carafe from breakfast, and he poured the remaining caffeine into his mug. He sipped it slowly, hoping the extra caffeine would help his mood. "Sweetheart?" Lisa called from upstairs. "Can you check and see if my purse is in the car?" "Sure." Mike gulped the rest of the lukewarm coffee and set the mug down. He entered the garage, flicking on a light, and opened the passenger side door of their Honda Accord. Mike spied the purse on the floorboard and picked it up. But before Mike turned back to the door into the house, he stopped as the blue tarp covering his father's pickup caught his eye. 2 years ago, his parents had decided to downsize and move into an apartment in the city. His father had said that he was too old and too tired to keep fixing everything around the house and taking care of the yard. "I just want to be able to call someone and have them come and fix what's broken," Tim Thornton had said. "And I never wanted to mow another damn lawn for the rest of my life." But downsizing the house also meant downsizing the car collection that his father had accumulated over the past 40 years. While Mike thought that his father was going to sell all of them, he was surprised when his dad drove over to the house in his 1972 Ford 150. It was brilliant cherry red, with an 8-inch suspension kit, chrome wheels, and 26-inch big tires. Growing up, it had always been Mike's favorite vehicle, and when his father told him that he was giving him the keys, Mike's jaw hit the floor. Tim Thornton had never been a man of charity, but his father's words surprised him. "I know how much you like this truck. I should have let you drive it more, instead of just letting it collect dust in the garage," his father said. "I know I was strict with you growing up, but it was the way that my father raised me, and it was the only way I knew how to raise you. Sometimes I wonder if I hadn't been so hard, then maybe Katie wouldn't have distanced herself from the family." Mike remembered how his father looked away in that moment, wiping something from his eyes. Though the old man never admitted to crying, Mike knew his father had teared up. "Anyway," Tim said, handing Mike the keys, "I want you to have it. I don't know if Kelly's into trucks, but after you have your fun with it, I thought Casey might like it when he's older. It could become a family heirloom, you know?" The door to the garage opened, and Lisa stood in the doorway. She had one earring on her left ear and the other in her hand. She wore a black dress that hugged the curves of her body, and even in the dim fluorescent lighting in the garage, the only thing that Mike could think of at that moment was how much he wanted to whisk her to the bedroom. "Hey." Lisa stepped down into the garage, her heels clicking as she walked to him and planted a warm kiss on his lips. "Did you get lost?" "No," Mike said, then gestured to the phone. "Kevin just called. They're loading Melvin in the van right now." Lisa shivered. What that man did was despicable. She took a breath and then reached for his hand. "How are you doing? You didn't say much this morning, and I didn't see you eat your breakfast." "I had some toast," Mike said. Lisa arched both eyebrows. "Breakfast of champions." Mike smiled and then handed his wife her purse. "Katie still hasn't called." Lisa hugged him. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." Mike kissed his wife's forehead. "It's fine. She hasn't been a part of our family for a long time. I don't know why I thought she'd want to start now." He took Lisa's hand, and the pair walked to the door. But Mike caught himself glancing at the truck one last time. Once back in the house, the quiet morning suddenly erupted in a chorus of siblings squabbling upstairs. "Casey, you little turd!" The scream preceded Mike's son, Casey, the little turd, running down the stairs with a big grin on his face, already dressed in his matching black suit and tie. Lisa had bought it for him, though Mike thought it was a waste of money, since the kid was 9 and would grow out of it by this time next year. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." Mike caught Casey before he sprinted past him and then lifted him up off the ground and set him on the kitchen table. "What are you doing?" Casey used both hands to cover his mouth and muffle the laughter building up inside of him. But Mike didn't have to wait long before he realized what happened. Kelly, Mike's 15-year-old daughter, stomped down the stairs, stopping at the halfway mark and bending over the rail, pointing at Casey. "You are dead!" Lisa moved toward Kelly and blocked her path at the stairs. "Kelly, what is going on?" Kelly took a finger and wiped some of the white cream that covered her face, then let it rest on her fingertip. "It's icing." Casey giggled. "It's not funny." Kelly flung her arm down, the motion sending the white frosting onto the carpet. "Okay, that's enough." Lisa pointed to their daughter and then back up the stairs. "Just wipe it off and finish getting ready." Mom, do you know how many pimples this is going to give me? And he dumped out all of my facial cleansers to fill it up with that fucking icing. Language, Lisa said, raising her voice. Upstairs now and finish getting ready. We will deal with this later. Kelly grunted in frustration, then stomped back up to the second floor. Mike slowly turned back to his son, and the moment he saw Casey's grin, he couldn't help but smile himself. Thankfully, Lisa didn't share their humor. That wasn't nice, young man, Lisa said. Casey finally dropped his hands from his mouth. I don't know why she's so mad. I've seen her eat tubs of icing whenever she gets moody. He shrugged, his voice rising one octave. I thought she'd like it. Yeah, I'm sure bringing your sister joy was the only thing that crossed your mind when you decided to replace her face cream with icing, Mike said, then moved his son from the table to the floor. I'd give her some space, okay? And I think it goes without saying that you lost your computer privileges for the weekend. Yeah, Casey said, grinning again, but it was worth it. This time even Lisa laughed, but the laughter was cut short with a familiar drone of a power outage, and the house grew eerily quiet. Chapter 2. Dad, the power's out, Kelly screamed from upstairs. We can see that, honey. Mike walked over to the nearest light switch and did the ceremonious flip up and down, which did nothing. It might just be the breakers. I'll go down and check. He left his wife and son in the kitchen and then returned to the garage. It was pitch black inside, and when Mike reached for his phone to use the flashlight application, he found that his phone was also dead. He frowned. It had just been at 85%. He kept the doorway between the house and the garage propped open, using what limited light he had as he carefully navigated the front of the garage toward the fuse box and popped it open. Mimicking his ceremonious flick of the light switch in the house, Mike saw the breakers hadn't been tripped. It was a blackout. Mike stepped back inside the house where his daughter had already come downstairs, half of the icing still on her face. Her anger transformed into a poutier glare. Dad, even the water won't run, Kelly said, then gestured to her face. I need to get this off. Just wipe it off with a towel, Mike said, and then turned to his wife. Can I use your phone? Confused, Lisa retrieved her phone from her purse, but it never made it into Mike's hands. It's not working. It must have died overnight. Mike paused and reached deep down into the back of his mind, where he retrieved a conversation that had been played between himself and his sister a long time ago. Something he always thought was crazy. Mike walked to the front door and stopped before he opened it, turning back to his daughter. Kelly, go upstairs and see if your phone is working. Kelly frowned. Why? Do it now, please. Mike's tone was stern, so his daughter dropped her protest and returned up the stairs. Mike, Lisa said, catching her husband before he stepped outside. What is going on? You're starting to scare me. I'm not sure yet. Mike stepped outside, squinting from the sunshine, and walked down his driveway until he was at his mailbox by the road. Their house was located in a small cul-de-sac in one of the many suburbs outside of Charlotte. It was a nice neighborhood, middle class, most everyone in the area married with kids, though there were a few exceptions. But it was a good place to live, a safe place to raise a family. However, what Mike saw as he looked down the road didn't make any sense. Cars were stopped in the middle of the street, their drivers out of the vehicles and checking the engines. Lisa joined him by the mailbox, noticing the stalled cars. What do you think is wrong with them? Mike opened his mouth to speak, but when he was unable to find his voice, he closed it again and shook his head. Mike, Lisa! The voice came from their right, and both of them turned to find their neighbor, Jason Fuller, walking across his yard and onto the Thorntons' property. Is your power out too? Yeah, we lost it about a minute ago, Lisa answered. Us too, Jason said, shaking Mike's hand as he joined the pair by the mailbox. He pointed down the road toward the cars that they saw disabled in the street. What's going on down there? Hey! Nasir Ashkani, their neighbor from across the street, walked down his driveway, waving his hand to catch their attention. Did your power go out? Yeah, Jason said. Looks like it's the whole block. Mike turned to Jason, noticing that the man was still in his pajamas, his crown of brown hair that circled the bald spot on the top of his head, disheveled. Jason, do you have your phone on you? What? Oh, I think so. Jason reached into his pajama pockets and removed his phone. But Mike had his question answered before he even asked. I can't get the damn thing to turn on. It must not have charged last night. But what's crazy is Melanie's phone isn't working either. I heard her complaining about it right before I walked out the door. Mike staggered back from the mailbox, and both Lisa and Jason reached for his arms as if he might fall. But Mike caught himself. Mike, are you all right? Jason asked. You're white as a ghost. Honey, what's wrong? Lisa grabbed his arm and squeezed. During most of the conversations Mike had with his sister during those first years, after she moved from the city and into the wilderness to live off-grid, she would talk about the different ways that society could collapse. And there was one particular event that mirrored what Mike saw now. Just think about it, Katie said, as they sat in Mike's living room sipping whiskey after the kids had gone to sleep. Everything runs off computers these days. Car phones, even our power grid and most of our utilities. Everything is automated and controlled by a few pieces of metal and plastic. But what if all those devices stopped working? She snapped her fingers. Just like that, all at the same time. All of a sudden, 300 million people no longer have power or running water. They can't call anyone for help. They can't go anywhere because their cars won't start. And even if they did start, they wouldn't be able to drive on the roads because they would be clogged with other broken-down vehicles. And no power means no refrigeration. Food would spoil. People would be rioting in the streets in less than a day, maybe even hours. It would be like the earth itself had stopped spinning. Mike remembered taking a sip of whiskey after that, trying not to dismiss his sister's conspiracy theories so quickly. But how would something like that even happen? How do you shut down an entire nation? Katie leaned forward. It's called an EMP. Mike? Lisa shook his arm, tightening her grip. Mike, what's wrong? Mike blinked, coming out of the memory, and saw the concerned expressions on both his wife's face and his neighbor's. I need to check on something. He retreated toward the house. I'll be right back, I promise. He jogged back into the house and then bypassed both his son and daughter, who were now watching the world outside through the front living room window. Dad? Kelly asked. What's going on? Just stay inside the house, okay? Mike disappeared into the garage again and opened the driver door to the Honda. They had bought it last year, brand new, and it came with all of the bells and whistles. The keys were already inside the vehicle, and Mike inserted the car key into the engine and turned it over, hearing nothing but a click. No. Mike turned the key back and then turned it forward again, disheartened by another click. He took his hands off the keys and then leaned back. He shut his eyes, shaking his head. This can't be happening. This can't be real. But after years of thinking that his sister was crazy for wanting to get away from civilization and live a life of solitude, the unthinkable had happened. And now, Katie was ready, while millions of others were caught unprepared. Mike opened his eyes, starting to sweat in his suit. It was summertime, and it wouldn't be long before temperatures rose, and with no AC, Mike knew that it wouldn't be long before tempers rose, along with the heat. He tilted his head toward the truck, remembering something else that Katie had told him about an EMP. It should only affect machinery that uses a microprocessor computer chip, Katie said. So newer cars that have computerized fuel injection wouldn't work, but most older cars, probably pre-1975 models, most of them would still work since they don't have any computer system in them. Mike leaned forward again, knowing that his father's truck was an early 70s model. He got out of the Honda and climbed into the truck's cab. Like the sedan, the keys were already inside, and Mike shut his eyes and held his breath as he placed the keys into the ignition. Mike turned the key, and the engine started without hesitation. Mike exhaled at the sound of the truck's V8 rumbling softly in the garage, and smiled as he rested his forehead on the crest of the steering wheel. His family still had a way out. Not wanting to choke to death on the exhaust, Mike checked the fuel gauge and found that it was full, and he then killed the engine. He took a moment to think about his next moves, then finally climbed out of the truck and returned to the house, where his wife and kids were waiting for him in the living room. "Mike, what's going on?" Lisa asked, flanked on either side by their children. Mike knew that it was going to be difficult to explain, but it was better if Lisa was on the same page as him before things started to rapidly deteriorate. "Lisa, kids, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because we don't have a lot of time." Mike walked over to them and grabbed his wife's hand, leading them all to the couch where they sat down. He crouched on his knees, keeping eye contact with them. "Something happened. I'm not sure exactly how, but it did." "Dad, what are you talking about?" Casey asked, his voice quiet and scared as he leaned into his mother's side. "We're gonna be okay, buddy." Mike placed his hand on his son's leg. "All I need you to do is go upstairs and pack all the clothes that you can fit into your backpack, okay?" He looked at Kelly. "Same for you, sweetie." "Dad, this doesn't make any sense," Kelly said, trying not to act scared. "The power just went out. It's going to come back on." She looked at her mother. "Right?" Lisa was quiet for a moment, her attention focused on Mike, studying his eyes. "Go upstairs and do what your father says." She gave each of her children an encouraging shove off the couch. "Go on, I'll be up to help you in a minute." The kids hesitated, but eventually slid off the couch and walked to the stairs, Kelly taking her younger brother's hand as they ascended to the second floor together. Mike smiled at the sight of Kelly, comforting her younger brother. That's what older siblings were for. The younger ones might drive you crazy, but you felt a need to protect them when they were scared. He wasn't sure if he did that enough with Katie. "Mike," Lisa said, pulling his attention back to her. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or are you going to make me guess?" Mike cleared his throat and decided that the best way for him to go into this was just to tell her everything up front. "I think we were hit with an EMP. It's a kind of device that, if detonated in the atmosphere, has the potential to destroy any electronic device powered by a microprocessor." Lisa was quiet for a moment, letting the words sink in before she slowly and carefully spoke. "And how would something like that happen?" "I'm not sure," Mike answered. "Katie told me that a nuclear device detonated at a high altitude would be enough to—" "Jesus, are you saying that our country was attacked with a nuclear weapon?" Lisa moved about anxiously on the couch, but kept her voice quiet. "Are we in danger?" Mike held her hands in his own, and she calmed. "We don't have to worry about fallout. At least he didn't think so. Right now, our biggest enemy is other people. The power isn't coming back on. We need to get out of Charlotte before things take a turn for the worse." "How?" Lisa answered. "You said that nothing is working." My dad's truck still runs. It doesn't have any computer components to run the engine. Mike kept a firm grip on Lisa's hands, making sure that she didn't look away. I need you to pack us both a bag of clothes. Try and fit a week's worth if you can, and make sure the kids have their hiking boots on. Then I need you to pack as much water and non-perishable food. Mike, this is crazy. That you can find in the house, and load it all in the truck, honey. Mike kissed her forehead and stayed close. I know this sounds crazy, but we need to do this before things get worse. Because if my sister's right, and I can't believe I'm saying this, then we need to get out of the city and head to her cabin in the mountains. You want us to go and stay with your sister? Lisa asked, and then leaned back. Mike, she wouldn't even call you back to talk to you about your father. What makes you think she's going to want the four of us crashing at her cabin? 5, Mike answered. I'm going into the city to get my mom. He stood and then headed for the bedroom, loosening his tie. If he was going to be on the move, then he needed to change into something more comfortable for the journey. Lisa followed him into the bedroom. Mike, I think we just need to slow down and think about this a little more. I mean, you want us to just leave the house? Our home? Mike tossed his shirt and jacket on the bed and then grabbed one of his Charlotte PD polos from the closet. He figured if he dressed like a cop, it would be easier for him to move about the city. I know it sounds extreme, but just look around, Lisa. Nothing works. No power, no water. How long do you think that food in the fridge is going to last? He pulled the polo over his head, then kicked off his dress shoes and pants and put on a pair of jeans and his running shoes. People are going to start to panic, and the faster we can get out of here, the better off we'll be in avoiding pandemonium. He tied the laces and then moved to the small safe where he stored his weapon. He grabbed both his service pistol and his backup revolver, which he wore around his ankle, along with spare ammunition for each, which he wore around his belt. The best thing for us to do right now is to get ready to leave. If I'm wrong, then we stay. But he grabbed his badge off the top of the dresser and clipped it to his belt, completing his ensemble. I need you to trust me. Mike knew that she was still worried, and he didn't expect her to not have doubts, but he needed her to get on board with the plan. It might seem odd now, but I know that this is the best play for our family, Mike said, and that's what I'm concerned about most, okay? Lisa took a deep breath and then finally nodded. Okay. Mike walked to his wife and hugged her tight. We're going to be fine. I'm going to head into the city, grab my mom, and be back before you know it. Lisa squeezed him tight before she let him go. So, are you taking the truck? Mike shook his head. The fewer people that know we have a working vehicle, the better. I don't want to draw attention to us by parading around in that bright red truck. And with the number of cars that are probably broken down in the city, I don't think I'd be able to drive very far. I'll take my bicycle. It'll be easier to navigate through the city, and it'll be quicker than walking. But how he was going to get his mother back on his bicycle, he wasn't sure yet. Be careful out there, Lisa said. I will. The pair kissed, and then Mike called down his kids one more time to give them a hug and kiss goodbye, both of whom were still freaked out by their sudden change in plans. You'll come back? Casey asked. Of course, Mike answered. You promise? Kelly asked. Mike kissed the top of her head and hugged her. I promise. It was hard letting go of his children, but Mike knew that time wasn't on his side. He grabbed his bicycle from the garage and pedaled down the street. Along the way, he saw his neighbors step out from their homes, grouping together and huddling around their cell phones, murmuring over what could be happening. Mike saw all of those people and thought about his detective shield. He realized now maybe he shouldn't have brought it because people would be looking for answers, and the sight of the badge would attract attention. And his mission to retrieve his mother would require an element of stealth and anonymity. Life was quiet and still right now, but Mike felt something coming. It was something that he couldn't name or see, but he knew that it was there on the horizon. He hoped it wouldn't be as bad as he thought. But he had always put too much faith in people. Chapter 3. Detective Kevin MacDonald rubbed his forehead, which was still throbbing from the impact of the crash. A high-pitched whine deafened his hearing, and his vision was blurred. He was worried that he might have a concussion, but when his vision cleared, and he saw Melvin Harris staring at him, Kevin sobered up very quickly. Melvin had moved as close to Kevin as the restraints allowed, the chains taut. But the moment that Kevin placed his hand on the taser, Melvin slowly inched back to his seat. And before Kevin had a chance to do anything else, the driver opened the panel from the front seat. "Everybody all right back there?" It was Officer Jimenez, peering through the grated holes of the cage. "We're fine," Kevin answered. "What happened up there?" "Not sure," Jimenez said, his voice a little shaky. "The engine shut off, and then all of the traffic on the road stopped. We smacked into the car in front of us, and someone sideswiped us on the left." Kevin looked at the back doors. From his position, they appeared to be fine. "I don't think we got rear-ended. I'm going to step out and have a look." He tossed a final glare to Melvin, the man still staring at him with those dead black eyes. "Don't you worry about making your flight. Even if we miss it, I'll drive you to Quantico myself." Melvin smiled. "I'd look forward to the alone time with you, Detective. Though I'm not sure you and I would have the same taste in music for the road trip." Even the man's voice made Kevin's skin crawl, and rather than go tit for tat with a man that had a one-way ticket to death row, Kevin opened the back door, flooding the inside of the van with sunlight, and stepped out onto the asphalt. It took a few seconds for Kevin's eyes to adjust to the light, but when he was finally able to see the highway, he stood slack-jawed. Oh my God! The entire 4-lane highway running in and out of Charlotte was completely gridlocked. Not a single vehicle was moving, and there were more collisions than he could count. Kevin reached for his cell phone and tried to dial the precinct, but his phone gave him nothing but a black screen. He frowned and moved up toward the front of the van, having to go up the right side because the car that smacked into the left couldn't move. Officer Jimenez was already out of the vehicle, his partner and driver, Officer Kershaw, struggling to climb over the seats before he landed awkwardly on the pavement. He straightened out, catching his breath. He was a big man, and Kevin was surprised to see him able to perform that little maneuver. "You two all right?" Kevin asked. "We're fine," Jimenez answered. "Yeah, all good." Kershaw offered a thumbs up, still catching his breath. Kevin glanced around at the car wrecks, shocked by the standstill. "What's going on?" He turned back to the officers. "Can you reach anyone on the radio? My phone's dead." "Radio isn't working," Kershaw answered. "Van won't start either." "What about your cell phones?" Kevin asked. "I left mine back at the station," Jimenez answered. "I've got mine." Kershaw pulled the device from his pocket, but like Kevin's phone, and every phone in the city, it was dead. "What do you want to do, Detective?" Kevin looked up and down the road, getting his bearings. They were already too far away from the city to head back to the precinct. But the airport couldn't have been more than 15 or 20 miles. It'd be a hell of a walk. And while he might have been up for the trip, he wasn't sure how his comrades would feel about the journey. "We need to get him to the airport," Kevin said, trying his best to sound as authoritative as possible. "It'd take us a few hours on foot, but if we keep a steady pace, we should make it before they take off. Not that I think they'd leave without their star passenger." Surprisingly, it wasn't Kershaw who threw out the objection, as Jimenez wiped the sweat from his brow. "Detective, I don't know if that's a good idea. The forecast said there was a high of 95 today. Dressed down in gear like this, we might get a heat stroke from walking that distance. Plus, there's no shade on the highway. You really want to walk 'em all the way there?" Want doesn't have anything to do with it, Kevin answered. But we need to get him there. And we need to move sooner rather than later. It's only going to get hotter. Jimenez rolled his eyes, and Kershaw reached back inside the van. I'll bring us some water, make sure that we're hydrated for the trip. I always keep some in the cooler. Good idea, Kevin said, keeping an eye on the road. The collisions he saw around him didn't spawn any serious injuries, but nearly every single motorist had stepped out of their vehicle to inspect the damage, and the growing murmurs over the road sounded like thunder from storm clouds in the distance. Kevin rounded the corner of the van, finding Melvin in the same place where he left him. Calling AAA, detective? Melvin kept his tone innocent. The guy was slick. Even though he and Mike had caught the bastard red-handed, he still refused to enter a plea of guilty. The man was content with dragging out a trial for as long as possible. Melvin knew all the roads led to lethal injection. You'll be walking, Kevin answered. Melvin glanced down to his shackles and then looked back up at Kevin with a smirk on his face. Detective, I don't think we'll make good time with these chains around my feet. Will you be allowing me to stretch my legs? Kevin moved closer to the bastard, shoving a finger in his face. The only thing that I'm going to be giving you will be a solid foot up your ass if you slow us down. The smile never left Melvin's face. A simple no would have been fine. Kevin waited for Jimenez to join him in the back of the van. There were always at least 2 officers to handle unchaining a criminal like Melvin. The man was slippery and smart, and Kevin refused to give the man any wiggle room. Once Jimenez unhooked the bar from the bottom of the van, Kevin stepped out, gun on his holster, as Jimenez led the convict out into the daylight. My, what do we have here? Melvin smiled at the wreckage that surrounded them along the highway. But Kevin didn't want to stay idle for very long. With Melvin's blue jumpsuit and handcuffs around both his feet and ankles, Kevin knew that they were bound to attract some attention from the rest of the crowd. All right, listen up, Kevin said, addressing both officers and their prisoner. We move quickly and we move with purpose through the crowd. We don't stop and we don't let anyone get close. Got it? Yes, sir. Melvin was the first to reply, and the other 2 officers rolled their eyes. All right, let's move. Kevin led the charge, clearing the path while the other 2 officers kept a firm hold on Melvin. Like Kevin expected, the sight of the cops and the prisoner pulled everyone's focus away from their vehicles, and people rushed toward them, bombarding Kevin with questions. Do you know what's happening? Why did all the cars stop? I've talked to 7 different people and no one has a phone that is working. My kids are in the car and I have a baby that needs to get home now. My mother's sick. My brother needs me to come and pick him up. It was too many people for Kevin to handle, but he stuck to the plan, quickly cutting through the crowd with purpose. But people continued to close in, shrinking Melvin's buffer of empty space. I said get back! Kevin shouted above the nervous buzz of the droning crowd. He kept one hand on his pistol, but the crowd was unfazed by the act. Their instincts of survival and curiosity were overriding the orders of a man in a uniform. Crowd control wasn't working. He needed to find a way out. Kevin turned back to the officers to tell them to try and find a hole in the crowd. But amidst the chaos of the moment, Kevin only saw Melvin Harris's black, beady eyes. Melvin formed a wry smile, which grew wider the longer the pair held eye contact. It wasn't until Melvin's laughter rose into the air, mixing with the crowd's unanswered questions, that Kevin snapped out of his daze. Hearing Melvin's laughter made Kevin consider putting a bullet between Melvin's peepers and be done with it. Save the world and judicial system a hell of a lot of trouble. But he couldn't do that, because he was a cop, a man of the law. Instead, he leaned into Kershaw's ear, shouting above the noise of the crowd. We'll switch places, Kevin said. his voice nearly vanishing into thin air the moment the words left his lips. "I need you to help clear a path." Kevin wasn't sure if the big man would be offended, but Kevin was glad to have Kershaw chuckle as he slapped his own belly and winked. "I'll be like a snowplow out there," Kershaw said, and then passed the baton that was Melvin's arm to Kevin and took the lead. "All right, people, move." Kershaw's voice boomed over the worrisome requests, and Kevin was surprised to see the mob of people actually listen to him, as a hole opened up and he moved away from the center of the road and toward the sidewalk. All they had to do was make it off the highway and onto a side road. He knew Charlotte well enough to be able to travel the back roads without having to worry about navigation. While he wasn't a native, he had lived here since college. Kershaw finally cleared a path to the side of the road, leaving most of the horde behind them, though there was another patch of people that they'd have to go through up ahead. "Is this your big plan, Detective?" Melvin asked, his feet shuffling against the pavement in quick strides as he struggled to keep pace with everyone else. "You're going to walk me through all of these people who need your help?" "They need me to make sure that you get the hell out of this city more than they need me to check their cars," Kevin answered. "I suppose that's true." Melvin was still smirking. "But what happens when you come across something that you can't ignore? Are you willing to let me go?" "I'm not letting you go anywhere," Kevin answered, an edge to his voice that he hadn't intended. He hated that the serial killer could get under his skin. He knew when it came to intellect that Melvin was leagues ahead of his own mind. But his acceptance of that fact didn't make that pill any easier to swallow. "I think you're underestimating your moral compass," Melvin said. "I happen to love the fact that people have a moral compass. It's a trait that I don't possess, of course. But that doesn't mean I can't pretend to have it every once in a while." "Stop talking." Kevin tightened his grip on Melvin's arm. They were getting closer to the second patch of people, and this one looked denser than the first one, more restless, too. "You see, it's all about watching and studying," Melvin said, "because I never had the instinct for real emotion. I had to learn to fake it, like most psychopaths." Kevin kept his eyes forward. He didn't want to engage with Melvin any more than necessary. "It's all about the details," Melvin said. "You have to have a motivation and root source of emotion to latch onto, but it also has to be relatable. You want to trigger empathy, which makes the victim want to help you more than they want to help themselves. It makes them willing to put themselves in dangerous situations, putting their own lives at risk." He laughed. "I have to tell you, Detective, when you're able to trick someone like that, it's thrilling." "I doubt that," Kevin said. Kershaw approached the crowd, already shouting for the people to let them pass. But this time, no hole formed. Instead, the people met Kershaw head-on, this group more aggressive. "What the hell's going on? You want to tell me why my car won't start? And why my phone is shut off? Are we under some kind of attack?" The dissent of the group compounded into angrier sentiments with every question that was hurled from the horde. And Kershaw could do little but turn around and glance back at Kevin, with a look of bewilderment about what to do next. Kevin knew that they wouldn't be able to push through this group of people without triggering a riot. A mob was like a wildfire. It was impossible to control, hard to contain, and didn't stop until it burned itself out. "Kershaw!" Kevin shouted, motioning for the officer to trade places. And he waited until Kershaw had a firm grip on Melvin before he stepped forward to address the growing crowd. He held up his hands, showing the badge in his left. From his position, he counted at least 50 people. And that was only the number of folks that he was able to see. "I know everyone has questions, but right now the best thing for you to do is return to your homes while all of this gets sorted out." "And who's sorting it out?" The voice from somewhere in the back triggered a ripple effect of agreement through the crowd, and the pulse of anger forced Kevin back a step. "We're just supposed to leave our cars out here on the highway?" "I live 20 miles away. How the hell am I supposed to walk that far in this heat?" "I've got medication at home. I need to take it soon. Why can't someone just come and help us?" Kevin didn't want to reveal that he didn't know what was going on, and he didn't want them to know he couldn't call for backup. The only factor keeping the crowd from rioting was the belief that the authorities could still do something to help them, to provide answers to their questions. "I have a prisoner that I need to transport, but I can assure you that an emergency crew is working on the situation right now," Kevin said. "He's lying." Kevin spun around, and the rest of the crowd focused on Melvin. "He doesn't know what's happening," Melvin said, "and he can't call for help or backup, because he doesn't have any communication either." More ripples of dissent pulsed through the crowd, and Kevin's face turned a bright shade of red. "Cover the prisoner's mouth. I don't want him saying another word." Kevin pointed his finger at Melvin, but when he turned to the crowd, the damage had already been done. The thin veil of authority that Kevin held was torn to shreds. The mob charged at Kevin and the officers like a tidal wave. Kevin retreated back to the other officers as the bodies swarmed him, but by the time he turned around, he saw the first few people reach the officers, and what was worse, Melvin. Kevin reached for his pistol, but when he tried to remove it from the holster, his elbow remained pinned down from the bum rush of pedestrians. "Everyone back!" Kevin shouted above the crowd, but the mob mentality had taken over. He was powerless. "Kershaw! Jimenez!" He searched for the officers in the crowd, but he had lost the patrolman. Unable to locate the officers or Melvin, Kevin elbowed the civilians around him, creating enough space for him to unholster his weapon. He didn't want to do what he was about to do, but the mob had left him no choice. Kevin raised the pistol high into the air and squeezed the trigger. The gunshot thundered above the rumble of the crowd, which grew silent and ducked the moment that Kevin fired. "Everyone step aside!" Kevin barked his order loudly. People cleared a path for him as he marched forward. Kevin searched rapidly for any signs of Melvin and the officers, but the longer that he walked without seeing either of them, the more worried he became that something terrible had happened. "Detective!" Kevin turned to his left and saw Kershaw on his back, clutching a bloody wound on his stomach. "Kershaw!" Kevin hurried to the officer's side and helped apply pressure on the wound. "Just hang on." But as Kevin reached for his phone to call for backup, he suddenly remembered that they were alone. Kershaw must have known his fate too, because the big officer shook his head as blood filled his mouth, staining his teeth a dark crimson. He reached his bloody hand for Kevin's and squeezed. It was warm and slick, and Kershaw struggled to keep a good grip, but he held on all the same. "He's gone," Kershaw said. "I saw Jimenez go after him, but I don't know where they took off." "How did this happen?" Kevin asked, knowing while he couldn't save the officer's life, he could figure out what went wrong. "There was so many people," Kershaw said, his voice straining from the wound in his stomach. "Melvin got loose and grabbed my pistol." Kevin looked down and saw that the man's weapon was gone. But Kevin frowned. "I only heard my gunshot." Kershaw shook his head and then coughed, spitting blood onto his chin and the front of his uniform. "The cuffs. He got the cuffs." Kershaw struggled to catch his breath now, and his eyes bulged from his skull. Kevin placed his hand over the wound on Kershaw's stomach, realizing now that the officer hadn't been shot, but stabbed. Kevin looked to the cuff key that should have been on Kershaw's belt, finding it was gone. Melvin Harris was one of the most dangerous men that Kevin had ever come across. Now he was not only free, he was armed. And the killer was now loose in a city without law and order.